Sometimes the greatest miracle does not begin with a king wearing a crown, but with one ordinary person refusing to walk away. Ethan Carter had lived beside the Rocky Mountains for almost 3 years, and every winter taught him the same lesson. Nature never promised fairness. It only rewarded those willing to respect it. At 24 years old, Ethan spent nearly every day volunteering at a small wildlife rescue cabin tucked deep within the forest, more than 40 miles from the nearest town. Most people believe the mountains became empty after the first heavy snowfall, but Ethan knew better. Elk searched for shelter beneath towering pines. Foxes slipped silently across frozen streams. Owls watched patiently from snow-covered branches, and wolves continued their endless journey regardless of the weather. That morning began like countless others until the wind suddenly shifted. A powerful winter storm rolled across the valley with astonishing speed, reducing visibility to only a few yards. Thick snow covered old trails within minutes, while freezing gusts rattled the cabin windows like invisible hands. Ethan checked the emergency weather radio before pulling on his insulated jacket, thick gloves, and snowshoes. Every instinct told him to remain inside, yet another feeling refused to let him stay. Animals caught outside during a storm like this rarely received a second chance. Carrying medical supplies, thermal blankets, bottled water, and emergency food inside a rescue sled, he stepped into the blizzard. The forest had transformed into an endless white maze where familiar landmarks vanished beneath drifting snow. Nearly an hour later, faint movement caught his attention beside a cluster of fallen pines. As Ethan moved closer, his heart sank. 10 wolves were trapped together against a natural rock formation where deep snow had blocked every safe escape. The younger wolves trembled from exhaustion, while several adults positioned themselves protectively around the pack despite showing clear signs of fatigue. None of them growled. None attempted to attack. They simply watched him with tired eyes as though they understood he represented their final hope. Ethan slowly lowered himself into the snow, speaking softly while avoiding sudden movements. He carefully spread thermal blankets across the sheltered area, cleared snow away from the narrow opening, and placed food where the wolves could safely reach it. One by one, the stronger animals gathered enough energy to stand. Then Ethan noticed the largest wolf lying quietly near the back of the group. Its thick black coat was dusted with fresh snow, yet what captured his attention were its remarkable silver eyes. They remained completely calm, studying him with unusual intelligence rather than fear. Ethan approached carefully, wrapping another blanket around the exhausted animal before gently helping it toward firmer ground. The black wolf never resisted. Instead, it held Ethan's gaze for several long seconds, almost as though committing every detail of his face to memory. With renewed strength, the wolves slowly disappeared into the forest together until only swirling snow remained. Ethan released a long breath, grateful that every member of the pack had survived. As darkness settled over the mountains, he finally reached his cabin, exhausted but relieved. While placing another log onto the fire, something outside caught his eye. Far beyond the frozen meadow, several distant lights appeared between the trees where no roads existed, moving steadily toward the cabin through the falling snow. Ethan frowned quietly because nobody should have been anywhere near those mountains during a storm like this, yet whoever carried those lights seemed to know exactly where they were going. The mysterious lights remained visible for several minutes before slowly disappearing behind a line of towering pine trees, leaving Ethan Carter standing silently beside the frosted cabin window. He waited for another sign, but only the sound of the winter wind drifted across the valley. Assuming the travelers had changed direction, he secured the front door, added another log to the fireplace, and finally allowed exhaustion to overtake him. When morning arrived, the storm had completely passed. Bright sunlight reflected across untouched snow, transforming the mountains into a peaceful landscape that looked nothing like the dangerous wilderness from the night before. Ethan stepped outside expecting to find fresh wolf tracks surrounding the cabin, but instead he discovered something impossible. The footprints of the entire pack led toward the forest before suddenly blending with a second trail made by a single person wearing heavy winter boots. Curious, Ethan followed the tracks for nearly 200 yards until they disappeared beneath a rocky ledge where drifting snow had erased every remaining clue. Confused but unwilling to wander farther from the cabin, He returned home just as someone knocked gently on the front door. Standing outside was a tall man wearing a dark winter coat dusted with melting snow. His black hair was slightly damp from the cold, and although his expression remained calm, there was unmistakable fatigue in his silver-gray eyes. "I hope I am not disturbing you," the stranger said politely. "My truck became stranded several miles away after the storm. I saw smoke from your chimney and hoped you might have some water before I continue walking." Ethan immediately stepped aside. "Come inside before you freeze. The coffee is still hot." The stranger entered with quiet gratitude, removing his gloves near the fireplace while carefully observing the simple cabin. "Thank you," he said. "Not many people would welcome a stranger this far into the mountains." Ethan smiled as he poured coffee into a mug. "The mountains have a way of reminding everyone that we eventually need each other." The man accepted the cup with both hands. "My name is Noah Kim. I am Ethan Carter." Their conversation began naturally. Noah explained that he enjoyed traveling through remote wilderness whenever his schedule allowed, although he remained vague whenever Ethan asked where he was actually headed. Instead of appearing uncomfortable, Noah gently redirected every question toward wildlife, the changing seasons, and Ethan's rescue work. Surprisingly, he seemed genuinely interested in every rescued animal that had passed through the cabin during previous winters. While Ethan prepared breakfast, another unexpected moment caught his attention. A small red fox wandered into the clearing outside, an animal Ethan had been rehabilitating after an injured leg months earlier. Normally, the cautious fox avoided unfamiliar people, yet this morning it calmly approached the porch and sat quietly facing Noah through the window. Noah smiled softly without moving. Moments later, several mountain birds landed along the porch railing, while a young deer cautiously stepped into the meadow. None of the animals displayed fear. Instead, they behaved as though they had recognized someone they already trusted. Ethan found the sight strangely comforting but impossible to explain. As breakfast ended, Noah quietly stood and reached for his coat. "You have already helped me more than enough," he said. "I should continue before sunset." Ethan nodded, although something about the farewell felt unfinished. Just before Noah opened the door, Ethan noticed a familiar detail that made his heart skip. Wrapped carefully around Noah's shoulders beneath the dark coat was the same thick emergency thermal blanket Ethan had placed around the exhausted black wolf during the blizzard, complete with a small stitched repair he remembered making only weeks earlier. Noah noticed Ethan looking but offered only a faint, unreadable smile before stepping into the bright winter snow. After Noah Kim disappeared into the bright mountain morning, Ethan Carter remained on the porch much longer than he intended, watching the narrow trail until fresh snow slowly softened every footprint. The repaired thermal blanket stayed fixed in his thoughts because he knew with complete certainty that he had wrapped it around the exhausted black wolf the previous evening. There was no reasonable explanation for how a stranger could now be wearing it. Yet Ethan had spent enough years in the wilderness to understand that forcing an answer too quickly often led to the wrong conclusion. Instead, he returned to his routine. Wildlife still depended on him regardless of unanswered questions. Over the next several days, the valley settled into a peaceful rhythm. The skies remained clear, temperatures climbed just enough for sunlight to glitter across frozen streams, and animal activity gradually returned to normal. Ethan repaired damaged nesting boxes, refilled feeding stations for recovering birds, and checked motion cameras placed throughout the surrounding forest. Everything appeared ordinary until he reviewed the newest camera recordings that evening. On 3 separate cameras positioned nearly a mile apart, the same large black wolf appeared only minutes before Ethan reached each location. The animal never approached the cameras directly. It simply paused at the edge of the trees, looked toward the trail Ethan would soon follow, and quietly disappeared before he arrived. The silver eyes were impossible to mistake. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. There was something familiar about the wolf's posture. It carried itself with unusual confidence rather than the cautious movements typical of wild animals. The following afternoon, while collecting medical supplies from a storage shed behind the cabin, Ethan sensed he was being watched again. Looking toward the forest, he found the black wolf standing between 2 snow-covered pines. Sunlight reflected across its dark coat, while those remarkable silver eyes met his without fear. Ethan slowly raised one hand in a calm greeting. The wolf remained perfectly still for several seconds before turning silently into the woods. Without thinking, Ethan followed the fresh tracks until they reached a frozen creek. There, standing on the opposite bank, was Noah. He wore the same dark winter coat and carried no equipment except a simple backpack. Ethan blinked in surprise and looked around for the wolf, but the animal had vanished without leaving another visible trail. Noah smiled politely as though their meeting had been entirely expected. "Beautiful afternoon," he said. Ethan laughed softly. "I was about to say the same thing, but I have to admit this is becoming a strange coincidence. Every time I find that black wolf, I somehow end up finding you instead." Noah glanced toward the surrounding trees before returning his attention to Ethan. "Perhaps the mountains enjoy introducing people in unusual ways." The answer sounded playful, yet it avoided the question completely. They walked together beside the frozen creek. Speaking about weather patterns, migrating elk, and the challenges of protecting wildlife during harsh winters, Ethan noticed something else that seemed impossible to ignore. Every animal they encountered behaved differently around Noah. A pair of ravens landed only a few feet away without alarm. Two snowshoe hares continued eating beneath nearby shrubs instead of hiding. Even a nervous mule deer calmly crossed the trail in front of them before disappearing into the trees. It was almost as though the entire forest recognized Noah long before Ethan ever had. As the afternoon sun dropped behind the mountains, Noah paused at the edge of the trail. "Some secrets reveal themselves only when the time is right," he said quietly. Before Ethan could ask what he meant, Noah offered one final calm smile and disappeared into the forest. Moments later, somewhere beyond the trees, a single distant wolf call echoed across the valley, carrying through the cold mountain air with a haunting familiarity that left Ethan wondering whether he had just spoken with a traveler or someone the wilderness itself had chosen to protect. The mountains always became quieter before something unexpected happened, and Ethan Carter had learned never to ignore that silence. 3 days passed after his second meeting with Noah Kim, yet the mysterious traveler remained constantly in Ethan's thoughts. It was not simply because Noah always appeared where the silver-eyed black wolf disappeared. It was the feeling that Noah belonged to the wilderness in a way no ordinary visitor ever could. Early one crisp morning, Ethan loaded fresh medical supplies into his utility vehicle before driving several miles toward a remote observation station where wildlife activity was monitored throughout the winter. The roads remained covered with packed snow, but years of experience allowed him to navigate the narrow mountain trails safely. As he rounded a bend overlooking a frozen valley, something immediately caught his attention. 3 large black sport utility vehicles were parked beside an abandoned logging road that had not been used in years. The vehicles carried no company markings, no government identification, and no visible license plates. Several people wearing expensive winter clothing quietly studied detailed maps spread across the hood of one vehicle, while others examined the surrounding forest through binoculars. None of them appeared interested in hiking or wildlife photography. They were searching for something specific. Ethan considered introducing himself, but decided against it. Instead, he continued toward the observation station, making a mental note of the unusual gathering. Throughout the afternoon, he noticed additional signs that the strangers were spreading across the valley. Fresh boot prints crossed trails that normally remained untouched during winter. Tire tracks appeared near old service roads hidden beneath heavy snow. Even the wildlife behaved differently. Flocks of birds suddenly changed direction without warning, while deer abandoned open meadows hours earlier than usual. The entire forest seemed unusually alert. As the sun began to sink behind the snow-covered peaks, Ethan returned to the cabin and found Noah standing quietly beside the split-rail fence overlooking the frozen creek. He had arrived so silently that Ethan could not understand how he had approached without leaving obvious tracks. Noah turned as Ethan stepped from the vehicle. "You had visitors in the valley today," he said calmly. Ethan looked at him with surprise. "You already know about them?" Noah nodded slightly, while keeping his eyes on the distant mountains. "Some people travel very far because they believe power can be found in places that still belong to nature." Ethan folded his arms against the cold wind. They looked organized. They were studying maps like they expected to find something hidden out here. Noah remained quiet for several moments before answering. "Sometimes people spend their entire lives searching for the wrong treasure. The response only deepened Ethan's curiosity. Before he could ask another question, movement appeared near the tree line. One after another, several wolves stepped silently from the forest. Ethan immediately recognized members of the same pack he had rescued during the blizzard. Instead of approaching the cabin, they spread themselves across the clearing in a wide protective circle. None of them showed fear or aggression. They simply watched the surrounding forest with calm focus as though standing guard over something precious. Ethan slowly turned toward Noah. Do they always do this? Noah looked at the wolves with an expression that carried both gratitude and quiet responsibility. Only when they believe someone nearby deserves protecting. Ethan felt an unexpected warmth despite the freezing air. He looked back toward the distant valley where the mysterious vehicles had disappeared among the mountains, then toward the silent wolves surrounding the cabin. For the first time, he realized the strangers were probably not searching for a place at all. They were searching for a person, and somehow the peaceful life he had built in the mountains had become connected to a secret far greater than anything he had ever imagined. Sleep came slowly that night because the quiet confidence Noah Kim had shown remained impossible for Ethan Carter to forget. It was as though Noah had expected every unusual event long before it happened. The wolves stayed near the cabin until dawn, silently disappearing only after the first rays of sunlight reached the valley. When Ethan stepped outside with a mug of hot coffee, he immediately noticed something resting on the wooden porch. It was a small hand-carved wolf made from dark mountain cedar. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every detail had been carefully shaped, from the thick winter coat to the calm expression and the unmistakable silver-colored eyes created with polished stone. Ethan turned the carving over in his hands, searching for a signature or message, but there was nothing except a single unfamiliar symbol engraved into the base. It looked ancient, simple, and intentional. Before he could study it further, he heard footsteps approaching across the snow. Noah appeared from the tree line wearing the same dark coat, his calm expression unchanged despite the freezing morning air. Ethan held up the carving with a curious smile. Did you leave this here? Noah looked at the small wolf for several seconds before answering. No, but I know what it means. Ethan waited patiently. Noah gently touched the carved symbol with one finger. Among certain people, this is a sign of gratitude that cannot be purchased, requested, or earned through status. It is offered only when someone has protected a life without expecting anything in return. Ethan laughed quietly. I only helped animals that needed help. Noah looked directly into Ethan's eyes. Sometimes that is exactly what changes everything. Before Ethan could ask another question, the peaceful mountain air shifted. Several dark vehicles slowly emerged from the forest road and stopped nearly 100 yards from the cabin. Their engines fell silent. One by one, men and women wearing elegant black winter coats stepped into the snow. None carried visible equipment beyond small leather cases. None attempted to move closer. Instead, every person remained standing respectfully at the edge of the clearing. Ethan counted more than 20 people. The entire group faced Noah without speaking a single word. The silence itself felt deliberate. Noah released a slow breath, but did not appear surprised. Please stay behind me, he said softly. Ethan frowned. Who are they? Noah did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked several steps forward into the open clearing. The moment he stopped, something extraordinary happened. Every member of the waiting group lowered their heads at exactly the same time. A second later, they all knelt together in the snow with complete respect, as though greeting someone whose authority required no introduction. Ethan stood frozen on the porch. None of the visitors acknowledged him. Every pair of eyes remained focused only on Noah. The winter wind carried almost no sound until one older man finally spoke from the front of the group. Your Majesty, he said with calm sincerity, we have searched every mountain, every valley, and every hidden sanctuary. The council requests your return. Ethan slowly looked toward Noah, unable to understand what he had just heard. Noah closed his eyes briefly before turning back toward Ethan with the same gentle expression he had shown since the day they first met. Then he spoke the words that finally connected every impossible clue from the past week. There is something I should have told you from the beginning. The black wolf you rescued during the blizzard was not simply another animal struggling to survive. It was me. And the people standing before us are not searching for a missing traveler. They have been searching for their alpha king. The words settled over the snowy valley with astonishing calm, Yet nothing inside Ethan Carter felt calm anymore. He looked from Noah Kim to the people kneeling in the snow and then back again, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, every detail from the past week suddenly aligned with perfect clarity. The silver eyes of the black wolf, the repaired thermal blanket, the animals that instinctively trusted Noah, the mysterious strangers searching the mountains, and the carved wooden wolf left on the porch were no longer isolated mysteries. They were pieces of the same story. Ethan took a slow breath before speaking. You are telling me that I rescued you before I ever knew you were human. Noah nodded gently. Yes. There was no pride in his voice, only quiet honesty. You saw someone who needed help, and you acted without asking who I was. That choice is rarer than you realize. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, remembering the exhausted wolf lying beneath drifting snow. I never expected anything in return, he said softly. I know, Noah replied. That is exactly why I could trust you. The older man who had spoken earlier remained respectfully kneeling until Noah finally raised one hand. Without a single word, every member of the group stood together. Their movements were disciplined but unhurried, revealing years of shared tradition rather than fear. Noah turned toward them. The mountains have given me something I was not searching for, he said. For now, I will remain here. None of them questioned his decision. Instead, the older man stepped forward and presented a small wooden case with both hands. Noah accepted it before dismissing the group with a quiet nod. Within moments, the visitors returned to their vehicles and disappeared into the forest as silently as they had arrived. Soon only tire tracks remained in the snow. Ethan watched until the last vehicle vanished around the distant ridge. They really listened to you, he said. Noah smiled faintly. Leadership is not measured by how many people obey. It is measured by how many people choose to trust. They returned to the porch together, where Noah carefully opened the wooden case. Inside rested several folded documents bearing the same symbol carved into the wooden wolf, along with an old silver compass whose needle never seemed to stop moving. Noah closed the case almost immediately. Some responsibilities cannot be postponed forever, he admitted. But I hope to spend a little more time here before returning. Ethan leaned against the porch railing and looked across the peaceful valley. Why did you leave in the first place? Noah remained silent for several moments before answering. Because there are times when even a king must remember what ordinary kindness feels like. Titles can protect authority, but they cannot teach compassion. I needed to know whether the world still held people who helped others simply because it was the right thing to do. Ethan smiled modestly. You found one volunteer living in a small cabin. Noah looked directly at him. I found someone who reminded me what leadership should protect. Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar sound drifting from the nearby forest. The same pack of wolves slowly emerged from between the snow-covered pines. This time they approached without hesitation, gathering peacefully around the cabin as though welcoming Noah home. The great black wolf was no longer among them. Yet every member of the pack looked toward Noah with unmistakable recognition before quietly turning their attention to Ethan as well. It felt less like gratitude and more like acceptance. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the frozen valley, Ethan realized his quiet life had crossed a point from which there could be no return. He had not simply rescued a stranger during a winter storm. Without knowing it, he had stepped into a hidden world whose future now seemed unexpectedly connected to his own. Life around the mountain cabin gradually settled into a quieter rhythm, but Ethan Carter understood that the calm carried a different meaning now. Every sunrise reminded him that the man sharing morning coffee beside the fireplace was not simply a traveler who had wandered through a winter storm. Noah Kim carried responsibilities that stretched far beyond the snow-covered valleys. Yet he never allowed his position to change the simple routines they had built together. He still helped repair broken fences after heavy snowfall, carried supplies from the storage shed without being asked, and paused every evening to watch the wildlife crossing the frozen meadow. To Ethan, those ordinary moments became far more meaningful than titles ever could. A week later, subtle changes began appearing throughout the forest. Birds that normally gathered near the cabin suddenly chose different trees. Elk altered their migration paths without any obvious reason. Even the wolf pack visited less frequently, as though responding to something Ethan could not yet see. During one morning patrol, he noticed unfamiliar boot prints crossing a narrow trail that only experienced rescuers usually followed. The track stopped beside one of his remote wildlife cameras before turning back toward the valley. When Ethan checked the memory card, he discovered something unusual. Several hours of recordings had disappeared, while every file before and after remained untouched. Someone had deliberately removed only the footage from a single night. He carried the camera back to the cabin and showed Noah the missing recordings. Noah studied the empty timeline for several quiet moments before closing the computer. "Someone wanted to know who has been visiting this place," he said calmly. Ethan frowned. "Do you think it was one of the people from your council?" Noah slowly shook his head. "No. Everyone who came here that day knew the rules. This feels different." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Then someone else knows where you are." Noah looked toward the window where fresh snow drifted gently across the clearing. "Not exactly. Someone knows enough to keep asking the right questions." The thought lingered throughout the day. Neither of them spoke much while completing routine work around the cabin, yet both remained unusually observant. Late that afternoon, Ethan decided to refill a feeding station nearly half a mile away. As he approached the clearing, a familiar red fox stepped quietly onto the trail. Instead of running toward the food, the fox stopped several yards ahead and looked directly at Ethan before glancing repeatedly toward a nearby hillside. Ethan followed its gaze. Hidden among snow-covered rocks stood a small metal container that definitely had not been there before. Inside was a folded sheet of waterproof paper marked with the same ancient symbol carved into the wooden wolf, but beneath it appeared another mark that Noah immediately recognized after Ethan returned. His expression remained composed, yet his eyes grew noticeably more serious. "This symbol should never appear beside ours," he said softly. Ethan looked at him with concern. "What does it mean?" Noah folded the paper carefully before placing it inside the wooden case. "It means someone inside my own world has begun sharing information that was never meant to leave our circle." Ethan remained silent as the weight of those words settled between them. The danger was no longer hidden somewhere beyond the mountains. It had quietly reached the edge of the sanctuary itself. That evening, as darkness covered the valley once again, the wolf pack gathered outside the cabin without making a sound. They did not appear frightened. They appeared watchful. Standing beside the window, Noah spoke almost to himself. "The greatest threat has never been the people searching from outside. It is the one who already knows the path from within." Ethan looked toward the silent forest where countless snowflakes drifted through the moonlight, realizing that the peaceful refuge they had protected together was about to face its most important test, not through open conflict, but through the challenge of discovering whom they could still trust. The following morning arrived with remarkable stillness, yet Ethan Carter sensed the mountains were quietly waiting for something. The wolf pack had disappeared before sunrise, leaving only faint tracks across the fresh snow, but every bird call and every movement among the trees seemed unusually deliberate. Noah Kim stood outside beside the frozen creek, studying the distant ridgeline with the calm focus Ethan had come to recognize whenever important decisions approached. Ethan walked over carrying 2 mugs of hot coffee and handed one to Noah without speaking. After several peaceful moments, Noah finally broke the silence. "The message was never meant to threaten us," he said. "It was meant to test whether I would respond with fear." Ethan looked toward the endless forest. "Will you?" Noah smiled gently and shook his head. "No. Fear usually creates exactly the outcome people expect. Trust creates something they cannot predict." Before noon, several familiar vehicles appeared once again at the edge of the valley. This time there were far fewer visitors than before. The older council member stepped from the lead vehicle, carrying only the same wooden case Ethan had seen days earlier. He approached the cabin alone, while the others respectfully remained near the road. After greeting Noah with a slight bow, he quietly explained that the council had completed its own investigation. One trusted advisor had been sharing fragments of confidential information, believing that revealing Noah's location would persuade him to return more quickly. The advisor had never intended harm, but the decision had placed both the sanctuary and innocent people at unnecessary risk. Noah listened without interruption before asking only one question. "Has the truth been acknowledged by everyone involved?" The older man nodded. "Yes. Responsibility has been accepted, and the matter has been resolved peacefully according to our traditions." Noah closed the wooden case without opening it, then let the lesson remain more important than the mistake. The older man smiled with visible relief, understanding that Noah had chosen reconciliation instead of punishment. After the visitors quietly departed, Ethan looked at Noah with admiration. Most leaders would have reacted very differently. Noah gazed toward the forest where sunlight shimmered across the snow-covered branches. A leader who cannot forgive eventually teaches everyone to hide the truth. I would rather build a future where honesty feels safe. Ethan reflected on those words throughout the afternoon while repairing one of the observation trails. Everywhere he walked, the valley seemed lighter than it had only days before. The birds returned to familiar branches, deer wandered peacefully into the open meadow, and by sunset the wolf pack appeared once more along the edge of the clearing. They no longer formed a protective circle around the cabin. Instead, they moved freely through the forest with quiet confidence, as though they understood the unseen tension had finally passed. The great black wolf did not appear among them, yet Ethan no longer searched for it. He understood that Noah had never truly been absent from the pack. He had simply chosen another way to stand beside them. As evening settled over the mountains, Noah and Ethan sat together on the wooden porch watching the first stars emerge above the snow-covered peaks. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation. The valley itself seemed to speak through the wind, the distant calls of wolves, and the gentle sound of the frozen creek beneath its layer of ice. Ethan realized that the greatest mystery he had uncovered was not the existence of a hidden kingdom or the identity of its quiet ruler. It was the discovery that genuine kindness could cross every boundary of status, tradition, and expectation, creating trust strong enough to change the direction of lives that were never supposed to meet. 1 year later, the same mountains welcomed another winter, but everything around Ethan Carter's small wildlife rescue cabin carried a different feeling. The snow still covered the towering pines, the frozen creek still reflected the pale morning sun, and the wolves still traveled silently through the valleys, yet the wilderness seemed calmer than it had ever been before. The rescue center had grown beyond anything Ethan once imagined. New shelters stood beside the original cabin, additional observation trails stretched through the protected forest, and volunteers from nearby towns regularly arrived to help care for injured wildlife before returning them safely to their natural home. Ethan never considered those changes his personal achievement. Whenever people praised the sanctuary, he simply smiled and reminded them that every lasting improvement began with small acts of kindness repeated every single day. Although Noah Kim had accepted the responsibilities waiting beyond the mountains, he never truly disappeared from Ethan's life. Every few weeks, sometimes after several days and sometimes after several months, Noah quietly returned without warning. Ethan would simply glance toward the tree line and find him standing there with the same calm expression and the same silver-gray eyes that first appeared during the winter storm. They never needed elaborate greetings. A warm cup of coffee, a walk beside the frozen creek, or an afternoon repairing fences together always seemed enough. Their friendship had become something steady and deeply understood, built not through promises, but through countless ordinary moments shared across changing seasons. The members of Noah's hidden council occasionally visited as well, though their arrivals had become peaceful and almost ceremonial. They no longer came searching for a missing leader. Instead, they came to support conservation projects, quietly funding new habitats and helping preserve the forests that had protected both wildlife and their own history for generations. Few people outside the valley ever learned the true reason behind their generosity, and that was exactly how Noah preferred it. One bright winter afternoon, Ethan walked alone toward the rocky clearing where he had rescued the 10 wolves during the Great Blizzard. Snow covered nearly every trace of that unforgettable day, yet he remembered every detail with remarkable clarity. As he stood looking across the silent valley, familiar movement emerged from the forest. One by one, 10 healthy wolves stepped into the open, their thick winter coats shining beneath the afternoon sunlight. They paused only briefly before continuing their journey together through the untouched snow with quiet confidence. A moment later, Noah appeared, farther up the trail, watching the pack with a gentle smile. Ethan joined him without saying a word. They stood side by side until the wolves disappeared beyond the distant ridge. "They never forgot," Ethan said softly. Noah nodded. Neither did I. Before leaving that evening, Noah reached into his coat and handed Ethan another small wooden carving. Like the first one, it had been crafted from dark mountain cedar, but this time it showed two wolves walking side by side beneath a single pine tree. The same ancient symbol was carved into its base, joined by one additional line that Ethan now understood represented a bond freely chosen rather than inherited. He carefully placed the carving beside the original one inside the cabin, where they remained together above the fireplace. Every visitor who entered admired them without knowing the remarkable story they quietly preserved. Outside, fresh snow began falling once again, covering the mountains in peaceful silence. Somewhere beyond the trees, a distant wolf call echoed through the valley before fading into the evening sky. Ethan smiled, knowing that some of the greatest stories would never be written in history books or spoken before large crowds. They would continue living quietly in places where compassion was stronger than fear, where trust was worth more than power, and where one simple act of kindness could forever change the lives of everyone it touched.